Good evening to everyone. I am James Claxton. This is a study group for the Japan International Mediation Studies Organization. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining. Before we begin, I'd like to begin with a couple of logistical points and points that are more technical than substantive. First, you all should be on mute, having entered the room. We will devote time at the end for questions and answers. So please, before you ask a question, make sure to take yourself off of mute. You should see an icon for a microphone in the bottom left of your screen. And if there's a red line across the icon, it means that you're on mute. You simply click the icon and then you'll be able to speak. If during the presentation you think of a question and you would like for me to ask the question, I'm happy to. For that, you can use the chat function that should be in the bottom center of the window, the Zoom window, or perhaps on the right side, depending on your configuration. But you can click on that and then you type your question, and then at the very end, I'll read a few of the questions. We plan to take about an hour, certainly no more than an hour. It's late where Geoff is. We'll take probably 30 minutes to 45 minutes for an interview. And after that, we'll turn to question and answer session. A little bit about this event. I hope this becomes somewhat regular. The idea is to have interviews with specialists in international mediation to discuss topics that are relevant to the development of international mediation in Japan in particular. I'll be moderating these sessions. We hope that the interviews will be followed by small study group sessions where we can discuss with perhaps fewer participants the issues raised in the interviews in more depth. I'd like to thank the Japan International Mediation Center for helping me to organize these events. Doshisha University, I'm coming to you from the office of the JIMS Kyoto. They've been great about advertising the event, and also they've made helpful suggestions about the event itself. So I'm very grateful for that. Turning now to the interview. Online, you can find many lists of international mediators, and many of those mediators identify themselves as international practitioners. Only a small percentage of people on the list actually have active international mediation practices, and an even smaller percentage of those people do it full-time. And we're very fortunate today to have with us someone who is truly deserving of the title international mediator in Geoff Sharp. Geoff does perhaps upwards of 100 international mediations a year. The mediations involve companies located in different countries, but also at times state parties and public entities. Geoff is recognized in both Asia and Europe by leading publications as one of the top mediators. Outside of his practice, he's also quite involved in policy around mediation, in training, and in teaching. He, for example, is an advisor to the ICC mediation competition in Paris, and he has sat as mediator in the final rounds on occasions for that, and continues to advise that competition. He maintains chambers in Wellington and London as well, and was involved in the creation of a very exciting mediation boutique, Maxwell Mediators, that operates out of Maxwell Chambers in Singapore. Apart from all of these things, Geoff was recently recognized with an appointment on an advisory board overseeing mediation for a variety of United Nations organizations. I met Geoff at the signing convention for the signing ceremonies for the Singapore Convention. And I came to see that he was not only a practitioner, but also someone who thought about the big ideas and policy about mediation. And I admit that I spend too much time on LinkedIn. And if you are like me and you're on LinkedIn and you follow Geoff, you'll learn a lot, because he writes about a variety of very interesting subjects, things like the intersection between third-party funding and mediation, litigation, analytics, and the topic for tonight, which is online mediation. We'll begin with a short conversation about his background, and we'll focus the rest of our time on the topic of online mediation. We'll cover three broad topics. First, how do parties and mediators prepare for an online mediation? Second, what is the online mediation process? And then finally, what is the future of online mediation after the effects of the pandemic have faded? Welcome, Geoff.
Thank you, James. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for attending on a Friday evening. It's very kind of you. And James, I don't think I've ever had such a generous introduction. So cut it in half, throw away half of it. And
I don't think I covered a third of your CV, but it's probably enough since we only have 60 minutes. So Geoff, you had a successful litigation practice as a partner in Wellington up until about 1998, maybe 15 years or 14 plus of practice. Why did you begin mediating?
Well, I was a litigator in my early years as a lawyer, and to be honest, it just never really what's the word, gelled with me. I saw too many clients go to court and still not be satisfied. They were either, they could have won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. They could have lost, and then they would have to appeal. And it was just unsatisfactory. So mediation started to break the surface, and I became very interested in it, and it was really sort of a gut reaction that it suited me. It just suited my DNA more than litigation did. Mm-hmm. And so I started reading, and I remember in the early years I used to cut everything out because there was no internet. I'd cut everything out, and in amongst all my litigation files above my desk, I'd have these 4 mediation folders where I would put every single cutting I could find in them. And that was in the early 90s. So it was really very early on. And I started to get the odd mediation. I used to lean on my friends and other firms to mediate and have me as the mediator. And we did that maybe once or twice a year for the first couple of years. And slowly it started to gather some kind of momentum. And the Americans came over and took some training courses. So Frank Sander came over from Harvard, and Bernie Mayer from CDR Associates in Boulder, Colorado. They came over, and the thing gathered momentum in the sort of last half of the 90s.
I see. And were your first mediations commercial mediations?
Yes, my first ever mediation was about a truck that had a big, Japan takes a lot of our forestry, our wood. And so we have these huge pine forests, and they have these huge machines that cut down the trees almost automatically. And this truck had one of those on the back, and it got stuck on the railway line. And of course, you know what happened, the train came along. And so my first mediation was all about the truck on the railway line with a very expensive piece of machinery on the back. And that was, and it was a success. So I was hooked from there on.
Fantastic. And how did your practice become more international?
I followed the internet, really. I think you talked about the ICC competition in Paris, and that was a very important development for me. I got invited because I was writing online in the early days on a website called mediate.com, which is still around. I got invited to Paris. I went over there, met a lot of people who now are my very best of friends, and I'd go back every year, which from New Zealand is quite a, or was quite a big deal. People would say, "You're going to Paris? Really? What's a New Zealand lawyer going to Paris for?" So just and so there became, through Paris, through the ICC competition, there became a community of mediators in a variety of countries, and all of us were at the same stage, and we've progressed together. Some of us have dropped by the wayside, others have gone on to have truly, cross-border international practices, which is just a complete blessing. Still don't know how I got I got to have one, but it's wonderful.
Fantastic. And I imagine your practice has changed recently.
Yeah, it has. So I'm sheltering in New Zealand. I came back from Singapore the day they went to I think it was Orange, which closed down the school. So I came back here and I said to everybody, "This is coming."
Mm-hmm.
No one took any notice,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a couple of weeks, and then we were in lockdown. And I don't see myself. I mean, New Zealand has shut its borders, so for someone like me, that's sad, because I love traveling. I love traveling to Asia, and that's not going to be. I doubt whether that'll happen before Christmas, to be honest.
Yeah. And how much?
So that's just life.
Right. How much traveling were you doing before the lockdown?
Oh, a lot. I was going to London at least 4 or 5 times a year, and going to Singapore, really almost commuting. So the 2 weeks before the lockdown, I was up there twice. I'd gone up 1 week and come back, and gone up the other week and come back. So Singapore is very easy to get to from New Zealand. We can go up overnight. I can leave here at 11 o'clock local time, get into Singapore early in the morning, and be mediating that day. So it's a very easy commute, really.
It sounds like your life has changed a lot in the past.
Yeah, it has. Well, and for the better. I mean, I imagine some people on the call will have, their lives will have slowed down, and I kind of like it, and it's no use, beating your chest. It's just the way it is. So I've spent much more time with the family. All our children came back to New Zealand from the Middle East and other places, and we've had a lovely family time for the last 2 months. So it's been good.
I'd like to, you sent me an email, and there was a wonderful quote in the email, and I'd like to take a minute to read the quote. This is by an Indian author, and I'm citing the quote directly. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. That's Arundhati Roy. Have you left your dead rivers and dead ideas behind you?
Isn't it wonderful writing? I just was struck by the poem. It was almost a poem. Well, I don't know that I have, but I am certain that life has changed, and I want it to change. I want to use my, in a very individual sense, I want to use my car less. I want to walk more. I do want life to slow down. I do want an international practice. So I'm not sure how that's going to work, but and I think we'll come to it when we talk about online work, but I'll be very interested how much of the online world we will take through that portal in a mediation sense. It's going to be very interesting.
And how much did you have an online practice before the pandemic?
No. In fact, I remember discussing it with someone saying, I know ODR was there, online dispute resolution was there. It didn't seem to me to offer much. It didn't have the same. I'm a tactile, if people understand that word, tactile mediator, and I felt that would never suit me as a style. But I was wrong. I was wrong. I think it was amazing how quickly the online mediation became something that you either got on top of, or forget it. You won't have a practice.
Right. And have your clients adapted as well as you have, or as easily as you have?
Well, I think a mediator needs to lead the clients, because there's no doubt the lawyers are slower and more cautious than me. But when you consider I might do 2 or 3 mediations a week online, and they're probably doing 1 or 2 during the pandemic. So it's too easy for me to say, look, let's just do it. So I have spent, as other mediators will have, spent a lot of time educating.
Yes.
And when we talk about the detail, if anyone's interested, my standard process now is to have a practice run with each party and have half an hour on Zoom showing them there's nothing to be afraid of. It's easy. I do it all anyway from my end. And they get it pretty quickly. And so there's been a lot of educating, and trust me, I know what I'm doing. I've had some success. Try it, you'll like it.
Great.
But there's no doubt that the lawyers, especially the international arbitration lawyers, don't take offense, James, but they are quite conservative.
Yes.
They're careful.
Right. No offense taken. But let's talk a little bit more about that. You began to explain your process for preparing a mediation, and you said that you have a practice run with each of the parties individually. Can you just talk us through how you prepare yourself and how you prepare the parties?
Yeah. Well, as a general comment, I'd say there's a lot more preparation than for a in-person mediation. We need to be much more careful about the documentation. I send out explanatory notes. I've got a mediation starting on Tuesday with 7 parties and about 63 participants. Well, this is the planning document. So we've got the timetable here. We then have the sessions all scoped out. So we'd never do that for an in-person mediation, but we are very intentional about the first session will be the openings, the second session will be the expert engineers, the third session will be the geotechs. So we'd normally just let that flow in a in-person mediation. With online, we just need to be much more structured.
I see.
So that takes time. The lawyers, good lawyers, will help do that, but it just takes time.
Okay.
And the documents all need to be exchanged much further ahead than in person.
Okay.
I mean, I have some detail I can show if anyone's interested, but I send out an online mediation agreement, which is very different from an in-person mediation agreement. I send out quite a long guide to online mediating. I'm very happy to send that to anyone on the call. And so all these things are new, and they took time to draft and get right. And globally, mediators were communicating about what do we need to put in our agreements, what should we give parties to make sure they're comfortable with the technology, etc.
Right. And I understand that you use this platform. You use Zoom for your mediations. Why did you choose this particular platform?
Zoom seemed to be the default platform for mediators, really ahead of me. But I like it because, and I've tried a number of platforms. I like Zoom, and the distinguishing feature with Zoom is the ease at which you can use breakout rooms, and so I usually have say with seven parties on Tuesday, I'll have about 20 breakout rooms, and I can have up to 50 breakout rooms. I can have up to 100 people, and it just makes it all very easy.
Right.
And you could, I like the screen share function on Zoom, and most people now know how to use it because it has got acceptance by the market. So if there are other specialist dispute resolution platforms, there's a couple in Australia which are quite good, but the lawyers that I work with would not want to have to learn a new platform when they already know Zoom. So once Zoom fixed its security issues, and there were a few, but it did a lot to fix those, I think everybody's fairly happy with them now.
Great. And that's another topic, security, and then also the related topic of confidentiality. How are you approaching those issues, security and confidentiality, differently now?
The security is mainly about the settings in Zoom, which are now fairly well known. I use a waiting room. People that use Zoom will know what that means. I use a unique link to, like you did, to get into this meeting. I lock the meeting, etc., etc. I allow no recording. James, would it be helpful if I shared my screen and showed people what I put in the mediation agreement around security?
Great. That sounds.
Would that just to give you a flavor, and I can certainly send it to anyone who's interested. Just let me try. So I'm hoping you can see that. That's my online mediation agreement, and it has the usual topics in it, but there's some added clauses that are particular to online mediation, and I get the parties to agree a number of protocols. Really, I'll use a strong, stable internet. I will not share the login details. I won't make any audio video recording. In my settings, I disable recording anyway. I'll provide my email and mobile phone to the mediator because we always need a second channel of communication in case something happens.
Right.
This is an important one. To the extent possible, I will participate in the video conference from a space that is private, so that other participants can be assured that there is no one off camera. And counsel are often, if they have a concern, it's about who's off camera and listening. And so we can't police that other than to get people to bind themselves legally that they won't do that. And then there's a few other things, but these are all new and relevant only to online mediations. So they seem, and they're fairly common now, and they seem to cover what we need to cover in terms of security and confidentiality.
Great. And do you use interpretation in your mediations between languages?
I haven't. You're just cutting out, James.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you have a need for interpretation in any of your mediations from one language to another.
I certainly haven't done it online. I haven't had translation online. I have in face-to-face mediations, and that hasn't been a happy experience either. But I haven't tried it online. It would be interesting online. I mean, it may in fact be easier online.
Right.
But I haven't yet.
Great. Well, thank you. So that's a really good overview, I think, of the early steps that you take to prepare and how you've changed your mediation agreement and how you spend time with the parties, making sure they're comfortable with the technology. I thought we might spend a little time looking at the different phases of a mediation, and to think about how the technology might change the behavior of parties and change your behavior. So if we were to take, for example, a joint session, are there differences because it's an online platform?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. There are differences, and I think the overall comment would be from me that we spend less time in joint session than normal. My style of mediation is we will often, in a one-day mediation, we will often spend the whole morning in joint session. And that certainly doesn't happen online. So we tend to go to caucus earlier and stay in there longer. Joint session tends to be the formal openings and some discussion, but not a lot. Discussion, especially if the temperature in the mediation is up.
Yes.
Discussion online can be difficult because, of course, we all know that it doesn't work when you talk over each other. That just makes it a mess. And so people tend to pull back from a robust dialogue in joint session.
I see. So is that really the parties who are recognizing this limitation and reacting to it, or is it you saying we probably shouldn't spend as much time in joint session for the reasons you explained?
I often what I call inoculate the parties, and I do that in real life as well on different stuff. But I will often say to them, look, don't be surprised if we do not spend as much time in joint session as you might if we were doing this in person.
Right.
And I must say, I think my behavior does change online, and if I had to sort of guess what changes there are, I am more directive online because I have to be. And so I'll say something like, James, can you speak now? And Yuto, could you speak then? And then Akira will come to you later. So I will direct traffic much more than I would if I was in person. Yeah. Just because I think people need that, because otherwise we trip over each other. Right. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and it's really interesting. So you're actually changing your behavior because you're online. I read an article about how people are perceived online, and the point was made that silence can be more easily interpreted as disagreement or lack of preparation. Are there other ways that you think your behavior is different online as a mediator?
Well, the first thing I should say is I don't like becoming directive. It's not my style. So it's not something I'm liking. It's something I think I need to do to get the job done. In terms of other changes, nothing jumps out. And in fact, the one thing I've been surprised about given that I did virtually none before the pandemic, and now have got enough mediations online behind me to feel I can recognize some themes. I am absolutely, impressed by how I can still make a connection with people on screen. And I just thought that would be the big thing that would never happen. It does take longer, but I had a very difficult mediation earlier this week. It was to do with a legal partnership, and the relationships were very, very fractured, very difficult. And, to be honest, I think if I asked them now, they would say they would prefer to be online than in the room together. They were able to deal with the disagreements between them, I think, better online than in person. So that was a really interesting example of actually some things may be better suited to online.
That's right. That's really interesting. I'd like to explore that a little bit more, this idea of rapport and how you can connect with the parties and what new challenges there might be by talking about the private sessions. But I had one question before that, which is that in terms of the time that you take for the mediation, is it pretty much the same, or do you have shorter days? How do you adjust?
We definitely have shorter days. 5 or 6 hours online is a very long time, and everybody, including the mediator, get very tired. So we take breaks basically on the hour, just short mini breaks, and then we have a lunch, half an hour for lunch. So on Monday we started at 8:30 in the morning, and we were finished by 3:30, 4 o'clock, and that was a long day. Everybody was fairly worn out. And so I don't know what it is, but this is information coming in from all my international contacts. We're all getting very tired online.
Right.
Maybe it's because I'm getting old. I don't know, but
I'm not sure that's it. But that actually raises another point, which is when you have parties who are spread out across the world. You said you have a mediation with 7 parties. How do you manage the time in terms of when to start and when you'll finish? Do you just try and find some time that's least inconvenient for everyone? How do you approach that?
I use a little app called Time Buddy, which gives everybody the ability to work out. You can work out, but I mean, we're starting one. I'm starting an oil and gas mediation that has Australian London. I'm in New Zealand, parties in Australia, parties in London. We're going to start that at 4 p.m. Our time. And that's sort of 4 a.m. London, 2 p.m. Australia, 4 p.m. New Zealand, and we'll just go through. And it's, it's easier than getting on a plane and flying for 12 hours and having jet lag in Seoul or somewhere.
Absolutely. Great.
So we usually work it out. My view is that the parties should work out what's most convenient to them, and as a mediator, I'll always fit in. That's my sort of approach to it.
It's good of you. So we just began.
Well, no one's on New Zealand time, so it's it's hopeless.
We just began to talk about rapport with parties, and so that takes us to the private sessions. Is there anything more that you can tell us about how private sessions are different on an online platform?
Well, I always love private sessions. I don't subscribe to the caucus only model that is very popular in Southern California and other places, but I do love private sessions, and I love them online. I find that that I can, yes, it's difficult getting rapport in joint, but gee whiz, in private sessions, I do think people have the same sense of relief coming out of the main room into the private room. They can decompress. The mediator has a more friendly demeanor. You don't have your sort of your poker, your game face on that you do in joint.
Yes.
And the same dynamics seem to happen online as in person. And the just coming back to Zoom and some of the detail, the Zoom private space is really clever. You can move in very easily. I can join, I can leave, I can go back. The parties know that it's secure. They can see on screen who's in their room, and I think the private sessions online are the real engine room. Is that if that makes sense? Engine room of the mediation, mainly because we spend more time in them. But it's so easy for me to jump back and forth, and the parties in Zoom can call me in. They can ask. They can press a button and I'll be told James wants me in breakout room number 1, etc. So it's very easy. I tend to name my breakout rooms in the same way as you might name a conference, floor. So people come into the waiting room when they join the mediation. That's the same as the law firm lobby. I'll then show them into the main room, which is the main conference room, and then I'll take them to their breakout room. James Claxton, plaintiff, Joe Smith, defendant, and then I'll have my office. I'll have counsel only. I'll have a hallway. In my in-person mediations, I do a lot of work in the hallway, so I like to have a room that lawyers who work with me will think, oh yes, this is where Geoff walks us up and down the hallway and talks to us. So I like to visualize it in the same way you would a law firm with conference room, breakout room, and that tends to allow people to understand this structure much better.
You're making a really compelling argument in favor of online mediation. Are there any cases where you think that online mediation wouldn't be appropriate, that you wouldn't mediate the case because it needed to be online?
Well, look, I don't think anyone would pretend that it's like for like. If I had a choice, in person every time, because as I said earlier, I'm a tactile mediator. I'm not really at ease socially in a social sense. I don't have a big social life, but I do like the interactions I have in the mediation room. They just give me energy, and I miss that. You get some of it on Zoom, but all of us are probably zoomed out. At this stage of the pandemic, so I miss it. And for instance, this mediation I'm doing next week, if we could, we would absolutely be doing that in person. There are so many experts and so many people that it's going to be very difficult, but there are reasons why we just have to get on with it.
Yes.
And so it's a big mediation worth a lot of money with a lot of moving parts, and there's no doubt that if we could, we would do that in a hotel complex where we could have 10 breakout rooms and a huge conference room, and everybody would be feeling much more comfortable. So I think my sense is that online mediation, the optimum number of people is about 10 or 15, and 2 or 3 parties maximum, I think. In terms of subject matter, there's nothing that I would say, you can't mediate online. I would imagine with language difficulties, would be very interesting to see whether an interpreter would be better online than offline. I'd be interested in that.
Great. So we've talked about the different steps in mediation. We've covered the private sessions. We've covered the joint sessions. We even covered the hallway, which I wasn't expecting. And it sounds relatively positive, your message about mediation. I was wondering how you see things developing in the future. Does this have legs? Will this continue even when face-to-face mediations are possible.
I'm hoping some people might have some comment about that when we open up for questions. I mean, we're talking about Arunda Roy's portal. I very much hope and expect to take some of what I've learned through to the future. I do think we're just talking about the caucus sessions online. I do think that I'm going to explore caucusing online pre-mediation. So I'm going to take my practice session that I do now, and to be honest, I do the practice session to give them a practice, but also to build the connection, to talk to them informally, to get more information the day before, 2 days before the mediation, when they don't even know we're mediating. And I'm starting. Look, I've started mediating. They don't even know that. So I'm hoping to build into my usual in-person international practice, a series of online caucus sessions. That means when we actually meet in Tokyo or meet in Seoul, we will be much further ahead than we have been in the past, because there will be some sort of connection. I will have, started working with them privately, and the lawyers will have met on screen. So rather than sort of an American lawyer and a Korean lawyer turning up and meeting for the first time, having written letters to each other for a year, they will have met on screen and they will have started to do what they need to do. So I'm very much expecting to build a series of virtual meetings into the lead up, into the what I call the intake phase of. And I'm excited about that, because I can see real value in doing that. The other thing I hope, sometimes I get involved in mediations where the parties are not really ready to meet each other in the same room. They are not ready. And I think that we can use online mediation to deal with that situation, to bring them to the point where they are ready to meet in person. Or actually, like on Monday with the partnership dispute I did, they are more comfortable online and we'll do the whole thing online. So I can see those kind of concepts developing, because I instinctively know that there's some value there.
That's fascinating. So we've now covered all the stages of mediation. We've talked generally about the future of mediation. I think I'd like to give the participants the opportunity to ask you questions directly. So I'd like to invite the participants to ask questions. Please make sure that you take off the mute before you speak, and kindly put the mute back on after you have asked your question. And please, anyone who should feel free to speak.
Can I? James and
Yes,
Geoff,
please.
this is Geoff speaking.
Yes, hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. First of all, thank you very much. This very, tremendous, wonderful opportunity for us to discuss on the online mediation. And that's, I think, the most, valuable topic, especially at this stage. And thank you very much for your very, very practical and helpful information and discussion. So my question is I could have some, but maybe I should focus on just one thing. Is I'm in charge of the web hearing kind of committee for the Japan International Dispute Resolution Center, which is as you know, the just established this March. Although this is for the arbitration, but we're now preparing for how to set up our web hearing, some sort of a protocol and process, and of course, including the technology side and the cybersecurity side, and maybe rule and laws, soft aspects. So my question is, one of my expertise is the cybersecurity, and I did the a panel discussion 2 years ago in Paris at the World Bank regarding the how to proceed with the cybersecurity for international arbitration and mediation, and discussing the so-called ICA's protocol. So ICA and the New York City Bar Associations and the CPR working group prepare the such protocol for the cybersecurity for international arbitration. So my question to Geoff is I really appreciate and really I was very interested in such sort of a mediation agreement which you kindly shown. So such contents is actually reflecting such substance of the party's obligation or mediator's obligation to be in accordance with or follow up with the contents of the ICA's protocol or something, or if you just distinguish between the arbitration and the mediation. So you just proceeding with the data security issue for mediation, or you're taking into account such substance of the protocol for the cybersecurity for the arbitration as well. This is my question.
I'm not sure if this is going to answer it. I showed you my mediation agreement, which has a number of commitments by the parties around the cybersecurity. Let me, if I may, show you the guide that I send to parties, and I'm very happy to send it to anyone who wants it, but it's a lot of detail and it's far too long. But let me just give you a flavor of it and just see if this speaks to what you've just asked me. Let me try this. So this is the guide that I send to lawyers and clients, and it really takes people through the technical requirements, the online process, and the necessary protocols around privacy, confidential, and security. And so if I just scroll through it, you can see it's far too long, but I talk about the intake process, the video meeting, the agreement, the joining instructions, the practice session, the call on the day before the mediation. Then we talk about process, and then we get to the privacy, confidentiality, and security. And there's about I won't share my login details, etc. And then I talk about the settings, the cyber settings in Zoom, how I disable the recording and the live feed, etc., and talk about what to do if there are problems. And then there's some tips, and then there's some technical stuff about setting up, joining the call, and some sort of walkthroughs of the Zoom settings. I'm not sure that that's addressing your question, but that's what I do to try and have lawyers as comfortable as possible if this is their first time on Zoom, because I need them to be focusing on the dispute with their clients. They're worried that the technology is going to distract them. It tends not to. It distracts me a wee bit, but within an hour, the lawyers and the clients are focusing very much on the dispute. But I think the lesson I've learned is that you need to give parties and the lawyers enough information so that they are comfortable a long while before the mediation. I hope that that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And maybe if you could share with me for this kind of content.
Absolutely. I can send them to James, and you've got everyone's emails, James. I can please use them as you wish.
That's great. Thank you very much. And
That's
Geoff,
nice. Thank you very much. Thank you.
On this topic, where did the content come from? Did you sit down and write it all yourself, or did you look to some outside source?
We have a bird in New Zealand called a magpie.
Mhm.
And magpies are known for collecting little shiny things everywhere.
Yes.
And I'm a great collector. So I do not claim, there's a wee bit of me in there, but there's a lot more of other people. And one of the wonderful things about belonging to the International Academy of Mediators, which is a truly global collection of a couple of hundred commercial mediators, is that we all are very generous with our knowledge. And so much of that comes from collective wisdom from the Academy. And it's been absolutely invaluable. As we had about 2 weeks where my diary fell off the edge of a cliff. I had no work, and I sat down with a few others around the world, and we got our documents up and running and was able to give them to others and say, this is what we've come up with. And that was a wonderful time, really, because I hadn't done that since beginning my mediation practice back in the 90s. So it was like Groundhog Day. It was fantastic.
That's great. Would someone else like to ask a question of Geoff?
Well, this is Koji Takahashi. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation on the online mediation. May I ask a question about confidentiality? You did mention that there is a concern, but you also said that contractually you could bind the parties with confidentiality obligations. And yet, I wonder whether there remains concerns about policing compliance. It's one thing to contractually agree to honor confidentiality, but it's quite another whether they would actually respect it. And with online mediation, it's far easier to actually record things, audio or video, whatever, even if you don't use the Zoom equipment. So I wonder whether that has any impact on the full and frank disclosure on the part of each side, and that may have a detrimental effect on the successful mediation. That's my question.
Yeah, great question. I haven't noticed any impact on the full and frankness, but I do agree with you that online is much more susceptible to abuse. I mean, there's nothing stopping someone in a face-to-face mediation with a pen that can record. I mean, you know, I've had one very early on in my mediation career. I had someone recording a private session. They left the room to leave the other side to talk to me privately, and they left their bag on the seat. And there was an old-fashioned. The only reason someone heard it was an old-fashioned little one of those dictaphones that had a tape going around. Nowadays, you wouldn't hear it because it's all digital. So I would say that in real life you can do that as well. Some mediators do ask participants to pick up their camera and scan the room, because the concern seems to be off-camera participants. So people aren't too concerned that people might be recording, because I think there's an acceptance they can do that anyway. And as you say, they don't need to be on Zoom, because I disable all my recording, anyone's recording ability on my Zoom calls. But the concern seems to be that there'll be actors off camera, and so some mediators are asking people to show them the room. Personally, I don't. If people want to game the system, and one would have to ask why. But if people want to game the system, they will. But Koji, to answer your question, I don't see that it's impacted on the frankness and the discussion and the robustness that I've noticed anyway.
Well, Thank you very much. It's really reassuring. Thank you.
Great. Perhaps we have time for one more question. I'd like to release Geoff. It's getting to be quite late in New Zealand, but would one more person like to ask a question?
Can I ask a question, James?
Indeed.
Are the Japanese courts functioning at the moment? Does mediation come into the spotlight because it's for here it was the only way people could progress their disputes for quite some time? What's the situation in Japan?
You have asked the right audience. There are many very qualified people who can answer that, and I'd like to invite someone who's familiar with Japanese court practice to say a couple of words on that point.
This is Joshi speaking. Actually the Japanese court system is quite but basically the hearing is public, but the Japanese judges are taking a role as the mediator actually, and they are doing a lot of the private session, expert session in a kind of private room, you know. Then very successful for reaching the settlement between the parties. But sometimes the Japanese judges are very kind of you know, aggressive and kind of threatening against the parties because they are decision maker, and also, you know, there is no rule for the without prejudice. So you know, some judges are quite, you know, skillful, but some aggressive, and then but at this stage the Japanese court is sort of a lockdown under this situation, and except for, like, you know, provisional injunctions or warrant, you know, the order or something. But you know, the Japanese mediation system has been functioning very well. Then question for the online operation, you know, Japanese court system is very behind from the global standard, except for the so-called preparatory session, which is some sort of you know, online type of online means just a telephone, but sometimes the video conference could be conducted, but that's a quite, you know, exceptional, and the recent situation is quite, you know, reflecting how the Japanese court system is quite behind. But on the other hand, such no connection with the cyber security, you know, cyber world, that means the Japanese court system is quite good for security actually, you know, or no attack from the cyber or something. So that's kind of a situation. But maybe Furuta sensei or some other good litigators also should have some comments for the Japanese litigations and mediation, actual mediation, I think.
If we insist, I'm Furuta. Geoff, thank you for your wonderful presentation. It's very informative. Regarding the current situation in Japan, at least on the Tokyo, Osaka, in the big cities, the court hearing for litigation have been all postponed from April to end of the May. And as for mediation, as far as I am aware, almost all the cases, also mediation sessions have been postponed in Japanese court. So only output functioning now in Tokyo and Osaka in courthouses, bankruptcy cases, and provisional injunction cases only. And we don't know what's going to happen in June, but because the state of emergency have been lifted in many areas of Japan, probably in some area in Japan, court will be start functioning from next week. But in Tokyo and Osaka, we would expect the current situation will continue at least until end of May. So that's the basic reason is, as Takatori Sensei says, we have no web function in the courthouse now. So it's for the viewpoint of cybersecurity, it's okay, but for our lawyers, we don't have much to do about that.
Yeah, interesting, because I think, you know, lawyers are recognizing that there's no clear legal pathway. Even when the courts open back up, my my sort of pitch to the lawyers is there's no clear legal pathway when there's no one's at fault here. There's no really clear way. We don't know what the courts are going to do. We don't know in New Zealand or London. We don't know how functional the courts will be going forward. And, you know, people will be worried about cash flow, relationships, and mediation just seems to me to be the obvious tool to get our businesses back doing what they do best. I mean, you know, 2 years when they're already on their knees to wait to find out whether they get their money or not is just no good to anyone. So I'm hoping that mediation will, as it often does in crisis, will, you know, be a good workhorse.
You know, what is called mediation is now on stall, but the private mediation is going forward using Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams. In private, we can do anything. In courthouse, they abide by the national statute, like a code of procedure or a mediation act. And those statutes are not prepared for the IT or web technology. And they need 1 year or 2 years in Japan to amend those statutes. That's the problem.
Great. Geoff, I'll abuse your kindness with one additional small question. There are institutional representatives on the call, and I wonder if there's anything that you could say to the institutions about what they can do to better adapt to the online world. Is there some role that institutions can play?
Absolutely. I think institutions can be real leaders here. I think, you know, it's all very well private mediators like me, we're small players, we could have our own protocols, but I think if respected institutions have their own protocols, lead with those around the online, have the technology, maybe even invest in proprietary dispute resolution technology, I don't think we will stay on Zoom forever. I believe we will transition through into a bespoke dispute resolution mediation / arbitration platform. And I think the institutions have got a lot to gain by being involved in that evolution. So I see them being very important. I mean, Singapore, where I know probably best, Maxwell Chambers, the big you know, venue there, they invested I think slightly pre-COVID, which was probably very clever, in really clever technology, so that they can run very sophisticated hearings online. And I think for institutions, it's a matter of investing in the hardware, investing in the intellectual property, and then, you know, bringing people like me on board and saying we can add value to your practice. You know, come and mediate through us, and we can add value to the practice. And I can see Korea doing that. I can see Japan doing that. That would be, I think, the next 5 years. I think.
Great.
We'll probably be mediating in hologram in 5 years, so maybe it's 2 years.
Great. Geoff, thank you so much. I've learned a tremendous amount, and I know the participants have too. We're extremely grateful for your time late on a Friday evening, no less. And I'd like to thank also the participants for joining. If you've enjoyed this session, I'd like to continue doing this once every 1 or 2 months. I'd like to organize an interview, and then afterwards we'll organize a small group study session, and we'll look at some materials. So for example, Geoff has kindly offered to share his guidelines. Maybe in our small group study, we can look at the guidelines and discuss them. So if you'd like to take part in a small group session, please feel free to write to me, and I'll add your name to the list. I'd like to keep it small so that we can have an easy discussion. Thanks to all for your time, and I think we'll end our session there.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, James.